February 13th. To order. The second item on the agenda is the discussion on the size and budget of the new given library. So, we had received a memo from Doug Willardson, and you had an agenda with 4 items there, Doug, which was sort of I thought was the central piece of your memo. Much of the other things we had, at least I had seen in the past. So if you wanted to cover, let me pull it up here on my little screen so I don't entirely ruin my eyes. Well, I will ruin my eyes. For some reason it's not working on my screen. All right. If you can pull up to the agenda screen and we can go by that. Does that work for you, or?
I stole your thing, so yes.
Had 4, if I recall, you had 4
Yeah,
key points.
I have it on this in the PowerPoint, so we can, if you're
Yeah.
okay with that, we can just go through this.
That's fine.
Okay, great. So yeah, thank you. We're excited to talk about this important project. As you know, this is one of the larger projects in our next 5-year SOP. So it's a big deal, and we're glad we can discuss it tonight. So staff recommends that we build the 9,250 square foot library that Oakley Collier has already designed. Honestly, we would have recommended a larger library, about 11,000 square feet, but we know that we are within certain fiscal restraints. We know our budget cannot handle the $11,000, so that's one of the reasons why we, 11,000 square feet, sorry. Thank you.
Got that.
All right, so yes, the 4 reasons that we have for recommending a library of 9,250 square feet is that all of our consultants, the experts to date, have recommended a library at that size or larger. The other libraries in the area are mostly larger than that. Our needs assessment that was done in 2020-21, that was done to tell us what size library we should build. That concluded that it should be 10,000 to 12,000 square feet. And as we look at the differential and the costs, it's actually not that much if you look at it, the marginal difference. So before we dive into those numbers, I just want to, we all agree that libraries are important. They're a big part of our community, whether that's for functional literacy, if that's cultural literacy. But libraries also provide a place for us to develop our community, for people to meet together, to have book groups, to have time to read together, to check out books, also even to work from home or work remotely. So they're an important part of our society, our community, and we want to make sure that we have one that meets the needs of our community. So first of all, our consultants, they recommend a larger library. So we have here a list of 5 studies that have been done over the past couple of decades, or maybe even 3 decades. So those are all larger than the current 9,250 square foot library that's being proposed. Even the median's probably about 12,500 if you look at all those. And even this Oakley Collier architect at the smaller size, they built that design knowing that we had a limited budget. If we had free reign and we were designing it for full functionality, it would have been on the larger side. But knowing our restraints, they did budget it and scale it down to the 9,250 square feet. In addition to that, we have all of our industry standards and best practices, and those all recommend a larger library than we're currently looking at. So I'll point out a few of these. So we've been talking about 1 square foot per capita. That's kind of what the American Library rule of thumb is. And if we look at the current average of all North Carolina municipal libraries, it's at almost that. It's at 0.92 square feet per capita. And if you look at the chart there, we have what the source is, what their recommended per capita is, and then what the equivalent would be for us here in Pinehurst. So if you look at that number, if you think about it, those libraries are built, who knows when, but in the past, and those communities have grown. So that 1 square foot per capita is what people are building libraries to that size for municipal libraries. Also, I pointed out that the North Carolina State Library has 3 tiers of what they recommend people build libraries at. And by the way, this was updated in 2023. So that bottom one, their bare essential, their minimum one is 0.7 square feet per capita. So if extrapolate that out for us, that's about 12,600 square feet. And the last thing is the average of all North Carolina libraries, and that's 0.56 square feet per capita. So even at the smallest of all those benchmarks, it still puts a library at 10,000 square feet, larger than what we're currently proposing. So another way to look at this is not just by capita, per capita square footage. We also want to kind of look at a programming view of it. So if we break it down by collection space, workstations, seating, all, et cetera, all the industry standards that we're looking at put it at about 11,500 square feet. The needs analysis that was done a few years ago also puts it at that. The Oakley Collier one, as we discussed, is a little bit smaller, and it puts it about a little over 9,000 square feet. The next point we had was that other libraries in the region are larger for the most part than our current library. So if we look here, a lot of you went to see the Moore County Library in Carthage. That's about 7,000 square feet. And then the Scotland Library in Laurinburg is smaller than what we're currently looking at. But the rest of them are larger. And even at the 9,000 plus square feet that we're looking at, we are an outlier even with that. I don't know if any of you also got to look at the Southern Pines Library. So what we're proposing is in between the Southern Pines size and what the Carthage size is. We feel like that is a good fit for us. And we can talk about those more in detail in a little bit. The next section is that the needs assessment recommends that we build a larger library. So these slides come directly from the needs assessment that was done a few years ago. So as you can see, they say it's clear that the residents want a larger and expanded library, and Village Council can be confident that an expanded library is appropriate. As part of that study, they recommended the 10,000 to 12,000 square feet that we talked about. They also mentioned that 10,000 to 12,000 square feet is a short-term solution. So that would meet the current needs of the community, but it would not meet the needs of the growing community into the future. As part of the analysis, there was a survey completed by ETC, who completes most of our surveys. So you see here the percent of residents who indicate library features or capabilities that should be expanded or enhanced. So we look at that. The bottom three that do not have a majority of people wanting them to be expanded or enhanced are not a part of our projected floor plan. So the art, music, and performance space, the maker space, and the retail co-location are not part of our current plan. But also there are several things that are not part of our current plan that were recommended. So an access to print, copy, and scan services, there's not a built-in area for that. We could probably squeeze that in somewhere. A digital learning lab with public computers is not part of our plan. An individual quiet study workspace is not currently part of our plan. There's no, like those study carrels that you usually see at libraries. They don't have any of those currently planned out in there. The next slide here, this is the public input findings from the needs assessment. So this is when they had the meetings and people came in person and talked. So a lot of this is very consistent with what the survey said. People wanted a larger library. They wanted more children's programming, more books, and individual quiet workspace and study space as well. And then this slide is the full summary of the community input provided in the needs assessment. So I'd point out items 2, 3, and 4. So it says that the library is too small to meet residents' desires, especially those with children. The library should offer a larger collection, and the library should offer flexible spaces that can be configured for different purposes. So in this current plan that is being proposed, we think we meet all those and nothing more, basically. The next thing I wanted to discuss is the cost differential between a smaller library and the proposed library that we're looking at. So if we look, Yeah, back in January, we had a discussion about this, and it was proposed that we could look at a 7,600 square foot library, 8,400 square foot library, and then the one that we're looking at. So the cost differential goes from 5.2 to 5.6 to the 6.1. So if you look on this slide, that $500,000 difference between the 8,400 and the 9,250 square foot library, the average annual cost difference to the average taxpayer is $3.71. So if we had to borrow that $500,000, it would cost the average resident $3. And that's if we were paying the interest. We have the money on hand, so we don't necessarily need to borrow it. So if we weren't borrowing, it'd be $3.06. If we wanted to look more at the 7,600 square foot library to the 9,250, it was almost $1 million, so that would be a $7 difference. Like I said, we don't necessarily need to borrow that difference. We have in our current budget $5 million. We have a library set aside of $500,000. We have the Given Tufts Foundation that's currently looking for donations and doing a fundraising effort. We also have the FY23 surplus above our expectations, and that could be used by council, and that's $1.7 million. So in total, we have $7.2 million that could be available, plus any fundraising efforts that the Given Tufts organization does. And as you recall, that money has to cover both the new library and a renovation of the archives. So looking at those ranges with a low and a high range based on what our architects were assuming prices could be, we're about that level, so between $7 and $8 million. So that 7.2 kind of hits us in the right spot. Last of all, I want to kind of cover a comparison between Carthage and Southern Pines. So this has a lot of numbers on it, but if you look at just that collection space number, Carthage has about 3,000 square feet of collection space between adult, young adult, and children's. The Southern Pines Library has about 4,000, and our current proposal is about 3,000. And then if you look down the rest of the list, it's kind of surprising how similar the items are. Like, for instance, staff workspace is almost the same across all these different areas. It's about a little over 1,000 square feet. So, no matter how big your library is, you're going to need a certain amount of office space for the staff and for them to do a workroom and a space for sorting books and all that. So even if we were to reduce the size of the library, we can't reduce the size of the office space. Those areas that we do have some flexibility, or that the only areas you could potentially reduce would be in the collection space, in the user seating space, and maybe in the meeting room space. So if we look at this, I don't know how many of you have been to the Southern Pines Library, but it's about 11,800 square feet. So in comparison to what we're proposing, we have a multi-purpose room like they do. Their children's area is larger than what we'll be proposing. So, just in rough numbers, we would probably cut off this children's play area and this children's office room, and that would be roughly our children's size. The staff space and the circulation space are about what we're proposing, as well as the lobby and the display. Study rooms and restrooms are also about the same. We wouldn't have this third children's restroom, though. Over here is kind of where it changes. We wouldn't have a computer space, but instead we have a proposed meeting room, very similar to the Eric Nelson room. And we have a young adult space, and this adult general collection stacks and seating with stacks, this is much, much larger than we have currently proposed in ours. So for the seating area, they have about 2,200 square feet, and we're only proposing to have about 950 square feet. Also, we have about 1,000 square feet less of collection space. So, we're cutting off quite a bit of this area here for the library that we're currently proposing. If we look at Carthage, this is the 7,000 square foot library, what that might look like. What is probably very noticeable with this library is that there is no seating. They have a couple of like diner seats that you could sit in right here. So I don't think that's the intent that we want when we build a new library. We also don't have any dedicated computer space as well. So the adult stacks, including what was over on the right side, the floor-to-ceiling stacks, as well as the collection stacks here, are about the same as what we're proposing. And so we're proposing to put 35,000 books in this library. The rule of thumb is 10 books per square foot, which would put us about 3,500 square feet that we would need for collection space. We're shrinking that down to about 2,000 square feet. So that means we're going to have tall stacks. Kind of the new library thing is to have stacks that are only like 4 or 5 feet tall so you can see over them. We would not be allowed to do that with the number of books and things we're trying to put into our library. This is the floor plan of the library we're proposing. I think everyone's had a chance to look at this in the past, so we may need to refer to it later on, but we have that. So what I tried to do on this slide is, if council's intent on eliminating square footage of the library, where could it possibly come from? So let me pull up my notes. So the areas that we can possibly reduce are in the user seating, in the meeting room space, and maybe the circulation. The user seating is about 945 square feet in the proposed library. Currently at the Gibbons Memorial Library, that room as you come in the front door and to the right that has the nice chairs and the table with the puzzle on it, that's about 576 square feet. So what we're proposing is not very much bigger than that room. For the living room, nice seating area, people can sit down, relax, read the newspaper. The meeting room space is a little over 1,000 square feet that we have in the proposed library. So this is probably the most anticipated feature of the new library. So right now, if you come into the library, especially when they're having the children's group, it's loud, it's noisy. Everyone else in the library kind of has to leave because you can't really do anything else in there. So what we're hoping to have in this new library is a multifunction room that can serve children's programming, so they can have their reading group in there. They can do the puppet shows, things like that, in a separated room and not disturb the rest of the library. Also in this meeting room, we have a multi-purpose conference room, similar to what the Eric Nelson room would be, where it seats 10 to 12 people. And then we have 3 study rooms that are built into the library. Those are very small, 70 square feet, but those are actually very, very popular in other libraries that are being built because they're multifunctional. You can sit in there with a one-on-one tutor. If you're working from home, you can use those. You could even jump on a call. They have a lot of ability to be flexible, and they're in high demand where they're built. So if we were to reduce it, we'd have to reduce it in one of those areas, and I don't feel like there's an appropriate space for us to reduce our current square footage and still meet the needs of what the community expects and wants. So in conclusion, staff recommends that even though we would love to have the 11,000 square foot library, and we think that is actually what our community needs, we think we can get by with the 9,250 square feet. But anything less than that, I think it really hurts our ability to provide the services that Village of Pinehurst residents expect and what they want with the new library. So going forward, we're having this discussion on size and scope. As you know, Gibbon Tufts is in their process of fundraising, and they're working on a kind of a prospectus and an estimate on what they think they might be able to raise. And so we're looking towards getting a report on that in March. Sometime in the next couple of months, it doesn't necessarily need to be April, but we do need to move forward with our architect's contract. If you recall, we met with them and we just did a contract for the schematic design, which we're currently about completed with. So the full design, we need to move forward and have a contract in April. Last time we met and talked about the library, we talked about a notice to proceed in October when dirt starts moving. This timeline would get us in that. We'd have to put the project out to bid in September. If we did that, had started the project in October, it's about a year process to complete the library, so we'd be looking to open it late 2025. So with that, I covered a lot of information, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Any difficult questions, you can ask to Audrey.
Well, thank you. I wanted to ask Audrey, did she have anything she wanted to add?
In general, I agree with all this. I think that we could better serve our community with larger than 9,280 feet. And I think if we do that, we will be looking to expand not too far down the road because we know our community is going to grow. But I don't think we can go smaller than that because we know, Pat, you're in there. You know that when the kids are in there, they sing, they count, they dance, and everybody quietly picks up their stuff and leaves. We don't have an enclosed area. I will say one thing, and anybody here correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the Jinsey Fallon room is 580 square feet. Remember when we were all in there? There were 21 people in there at one time, and we were, asses to elbows. If you look at the drawing for the meeting room, what is it, 300? I can't read it.
396.
Yeah, that's quite a bit smaller than that room we were in, and it says 36 children.
Oh, that room,
No, that one
is,
is
that's
it's
429,
420,
but
yeah.
about the same.
But it's still not as big as the Fallon room. So, I mean, I think sometimes you look at these little squares and go, oh, yeah, that looks really big. But when you put bodies in it, and one thing that's really important here in our library is people feel like it's the community living room. And seating is very important. People come, read the paper, do work. I think it's important for people, for there to be comfortable seating and places for people to work. That's really all that I have. I like the idea of the outside workspaces. We went to a library in China Grove that has a beautiful outdoor area, and it has internet connection. It has a roof over it, and some of the drawings show that, and it really extends the workable, usable area. And if we have beautiful landscaping, I think it'd be very pleasant. But I think using some exterior place helps. But, we're only going to do this once, so I encourage you to really think hard about this decision. I know you are, and I know you have, but I would like to see 9,280 or 250 at the very least.
All right. Thank you both for your presentation and your comments. As a user and a contributor to the Gibbons Memorial Library, I'm in the minority in our residents, but I thought I would actually ask the one person I know among the five of us who's been in the inner workings of that building for many, many years to maybe kick off with some comments. None of us, and unless I don't know about Jack, none of us were here for the needs assessment that was done. That was done in 19 and 20. And I'm going to have some comments about that later because I did take the opportunity to read through every single thing that you all have provided to me. Some of it was redundant, so I could go through it quickly. But there were various pieces of documents that I had not seen before or I had not read closely enough, and I'm going to want to raise those points. But Jack, is there anything you'd like to opine on?
Are we going to kind of do each person's thoughts?
I'd like to hear the
Happy with doing that.
general thoughts. I mean, I have mine. I just didn't want to. I expressed mine a
Sorry
couple
you
weeks
called.
ago.
You may be sorry you called on me. This will be kind of a stream of consciousness, if you will.
That's a great conscience you have.
I don't know what time we have until, but so I wrote myself some notes.
Go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to start with saying I've been following this for at least 25 years, seemingly forever, intensely in the last 5 or 6 years, obviously. But before that, the community should be grateful to the Gibbon Library Association Gibbon Memorial Association for providing and managing those services for the last 60 years. And I think that's significant. And I think we all owe them a lot. At the same time, I sometimes feel like this endeavor to create find a new library is a little bit of a mirage. You know, every time we seem to get closer, it seems to be farther away out in the desert there somewhere. But hopefully, we'll actually make this real at some point in time. I tend to work from being in the project development and application development business and managing that for years and years. I tend to start with the functional requirements and the services required to determine the size and scope of the project and the resources needed. Okay, that's where I kind of work up in that way. So in other words, this is a chicken and the egg situation between size and cost, I'm focused on the egg, okay, which is the end result that we're going to use, all right? Let someone else worry about how to feed the chicken a little bit. But I do feel that there are real constraints on the available funds, and there are competing projects that we have on the table for those funds. And we also have to consider other fiscal limitations and also future trends. And I think I'll speak to that in a little second. I agree 100% that we should build a new library separate from the current facility. I agree the chosen location, option site 3, is the best location for this facility. I agree that the new facility and the site layout should be designed and built such that expansion would be possible if proven to be necessary. I agree the new facility building should be designed to be similar to other buildings on our campus, similar other village property. I do not think that the current building needs that we have down on the Village Green needs to be expanded. I think it's satisfactory to house 3 potential functions. That's the Welcome Center, the museum, and the archives. I also want to note very carefully the trends that I perceive and I'm reading about relative to library usage more towards digital collections and lending, and the entire digital media sphere has become incredibly more popular and is more appropriate to design for in the future than pure physical collections, okay? I told you this would be lengthy, but anyway. With regards to the specific question on the size and the cost of a new library, I also wanted to preface this, but I understand we're going down the road to add approximately $800,000 to $1 million a year to our annual budget because we will now have 2 facilities, and we have to staff and maintain 2 facilities, and that's fine because I think the village has bought into that. I believe that a new facility in the range of $9,250 as proposed is an adequate and a pragmatic, realistic first step and will satisfy most of the program requirements and needs that have been articulated in reports and studies over the past few years. At the same time, it's being respectful and mindful of the financial limits of both the village and the tax-paying citizens. With this facility size, I think there isn't a significant difference over the long term being 10, 15 years, between this facility of this size and something 1,000 square foot smaller, okay? I also want to expect that, quite honestly, the building costs will be larger than my personal experience recently indicates that building costs have gone up dramatically over the last few years, and our building expense may be actually higher than our estimates. Okay. That being said, I think that settles where I stand on it. I don't want to address the money. I think the money is derived from the design. I prefer to worry about the design and the size and the egg, the size of the egg. And we'll worry about how to feed the chicken in a second. That better minds than mine can address that. With regards to the plans that have been submitted, I do have a couple questions and comments, since I have the floor. The three study areas, I know you say they're in high demand, but I think closed doors, small closed door rooms within the library are problematic, and I think it just needs to be thought through carefully. And whether or not, partitions with the study areas, through partitions that create work cubicles may be just as adequate and give you the flexibility to enlarge a space if those prove not to be useful. I don't mean to offend anyone, but I don't understand the need for a separate toilet area for the staff. I think the meeting room sharing the toilet wall is problematic also, unless you have an extremely thick wall that's soundproof. I just thought I'd mention that. Maybe an alternative location might be appropriate. You don't have to answer that. I hope that the living room as designed will be a multi-purpose room, and be able to make options and move it around and change things and maybe have larger gatherings, such as we used to have the gathering at Given type of thing. I think that would be useful. I think the plan is a little light on digital media access and its use and hands-on and digital catalogs. And I didn't sense that that's being addressed correctly. With regards to the current facility plan, which you didn't show, but I will mention it, that I feel that the current archive section, particularly the southwest corner, with their eliminating of the stairwell down to the storage area, and just substituting an elevator, I think that should be thought through. I think that that room could be used a little differently and configured to be more of a companion to the museum, which may appear up front. So those are my comments. So I know that's kind of more than you wanted. But those are my feelings.
The night is young, Jack, so.
I do think, Jack, also that, as Doug mentioned, these drawings were made. We talked about what we'd like, and we talked about how many these are not the end,
Final
this is
form,
not the
I
end
understand.
product. And, they just, I said, this is what it could look like.
Okay,
So, I mean, basically, this is.
I got it.
Okay.
Well, I had something in
But-
front of me,
but-
so I thought it made it.
No,
clear.
those are cogent
And plus, he
points.
gave me the floor for a little while,
know.
so.
Take
But-
advantage of it. when you
Oh,
can.
that's
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Just a couple other comments to what Jack said. The estimates are built on a $450 per square foot to $500 per square foot construction cost. So that's where it came from.
Well, let me interrupt you there, because last time a question was posed to you about what was the square footage cost.
Yeah.
And you said 450 square feet.
Yeah.
Okay. Your memo now says 475 square feet.
So
So no, I'm not finished. And I don't know where that's going to stop, but we'll talk about it more later. But it's problematic to me.
well, the whole time we've talked about the low was 450, the high was 500, and so last time.
Same numbers you've been seeing for 5 months now.
Not the same numbers I've been seeing. Go ahead.
There was always a low and a high.
Split the difference.
Go ahead.
And the only other thing I was going to mention is that industry standards for per capita number of books you should have on hand is about 66,000. This is proposed to be 35,000. And I think part of that is, we realize that it's digital. People read a lot of books on their Kindles. They also listen to audiobooks. So do we need the full 66,000? At this point, we don't think so. Like, we can get away with less. So I just want to make that point.
I'll turn to John Taylor. Do you have any comments you'd like to make?
Yeah, so I'm not sure how to organize this. In prepping for this meeting, I went back and I looked at all 90 minutes of the September 26th council meeting. It was 90 minutes out of a 4-hour meeting, so 25%. And I looked at all slightly over 100 minutes of the October 10th work session. And I was struck by one thing in particular, which was actually something that former Councilwoman Bosch said toward the end of her. She said, we have on one hand 3 ETC surveys that say 60% of the people don't go there. And we have the library needs, and we claim that that is a statistically valid survey and in certain margins of error, and we use that extensively in other areas. So I don't think we can say, well, that answer was wrong, but everything else is right. And she said, I'm trying to come to grips with the fact that in the assessments need, there are people who say we need more different library space against this. And to the best of my knowledge, that topic was never discussed subsequently. But I think it's a question that I have, because off any expenditure of money, 4 million, 6 million, 8 million, and going to Jack's analogy, my primary concern is that whatever we build is something that people will use. And I think I said before, I don't care that when we built the community center, no one was talking about pickleball, and now pickleball is an extensive use. They're using it. And so that's a good expenditure of funds on behalf of the village, because we can't forecast what's going to go on. Southern Pines Library was built in 1995. There was a little company, it was still private at the time, called Amazon. It didn't go public until May of 1997. And just because I happened to look this up, it went public at $18 a share, which adjusted for today's price is 7.5 cents, closed at 168 today. Kindles didn't come out until November of 1997. I'm sure that the people in Southern Pines, when they designed that library, thought they were projecting the future, but I don't think any one of them saw Amazon becoming what it became, or the invention of Kindles. And I have no subject matter expertise, topic that came up before, on libraries, and I have no idea what we're going to invent in the future. But I do think that the focus on digital is important. And in one of your slides, Doug, you talked about where could we save room. Off the top of my head, I would say it's not clear to me that a ratio of books to population that is largely based on history needs to be valid today. And if we don't have 36,000 volumes, if hypothetically we had 20,000, and I'm picking the number out of the clear blue sky, but that's still 20% more than we have today, that's 1,500 square feet right there. So I just got us from 9,200 square feet to 7,700 square feet, and I haven't changed anything else. And I agree with some of Jack's observations on whatever, but I think those are details. A week ago Thursday, a neighbor, one of my neighbors, approached Barb Ficklin and I and said, we'd like to come talk to you about the library. John Webster, who spoke earlier, was one of those people. And when you say these were your neighbors, 6 of the 13 people, physically their property abuts mine. So they really are my neighbors. Their concern is not to build a library. They want to keep the library where the building is now. And among the many points that were raised, and I won't reiterate the ones that John made, is if we are serving the residents of Pinehurst, whose tax money this is, they are more likely to go to a library than they are to an archives on a representative basis. Now, the flip side of that is, for people who come here from any part of the country to stay at the Carolina Hotel are more likely to go to an archives than to visit the Pinehurst Public Library. I don't care what we put inside it. So I think we have, as a council, we have to decide who are we serving here with whatever funds we expend. Jeff, you talked a lot about wanting to preserve the option of seeing what the foundation might actually raise. And that ultimately was not the way the council decided to go. I didn't think it was a bad way to go. Jack, you talked about you've been studying this for 25 years. I think in the presentation that was made October 10th, I think it was Stuart, who I know is sitting here, can't speak, but I think he said it's been going on for 30 years. If we have to put this decision off another month or two, I don't care. Because it is a big commitment of dollars, and we're going to get to do it essentially once, and we want to get it right. And it might not be a horrible thing if in that month or two, that will allow the trustees to come back with their consultant study and give us some idea. Although someone else said to me, and I don't remember who it was, that it's not clear whether the foundation, whatever they raise, could actually contribute to bricks and mortar, i.e. building a bigger facility as opposed to enhancing whatever facility we ultimately build. I don't know the answer to that. I'm not stating that as fact. We can, I don't know, Audrey, if you happen to know that off the top of your head.
I'll jump in, but it certainly could be used for bricks and mortar or enhancing the existing library. So it could be either or.
That comes back to a discussion, Jeff, that you initiated about if they could raise X million, does that mean it's X million less that we have to spend, and is that the right way to look at it or not? I don't know. There's no discussion, and Jack touched on this, there's no discussion in your document on annual operating costs. Southern Pines spends round numbers $1 million a year, and you can say, well, that's a 14,000 square foot facility, but we're going to end up with 15 or 16,000 square feet between the two buildings. And I think we have to think about that, and that has not been part of the discussion so far. I understand that's not Oakley Collier's concern, but it is our concern from a budgetary standpoint. And I could go on for a couple other things, but the concept of whether to finance or not is, in my opinion, part of a much bigger conversation. And we're probably going to come back to this in other business, but we've got currently on our capital, our potential capital expenditures, $29 million worth of projects. We have a surplus of about $13 million once we take $8 million out as a 30% rainy day fund, understanding that our guideline at the moment is 40. How you go from 13 to 29, either something's got to come out of that or we have to discuss, but that's a strategic level conversation that is separate and apart from any one particular project. And I look forward to having that discussion, not tonight. So I'll stop there.
That's fine. Thanks for your comments. You invoked the name of Dr. Morgan. We'll let him jump right in.
I hope accurately.
I think so.
I won't reiterate a lot of the comments that Jack Farrell commented on, but about 95% of that I agree with. I'd like to throw something else out on here is that I reached out to the schools in the area and did get a response back from Ashley Saccone, who is the principal of Pinehurst Elementary. And just asked the question, and we're actually here, if we go forward with the library, what do you think needs to be there? Because you've got a bunch of Pinehurst kids. And she, first thing she talked about was access to technology. So exactly what we're talking about here, about having more tech involved, and she described it as age appropriate. And I saw this when I went up to the Carthage Library, and I saw little, basically iPad type of stuff where kids were playing.
Kiosk.
What's that?
The crayon kiosk.
Yeah, the crayon kiosk. Thank you. I asked the mother if I could take a picture. I've got a picture on my phone here without the faces there, obviously. But I thought it was great watching basically 4- and 5-year-olds that were starting to use that. And obviously there's age-appropriate types of technology that's needed in there for the kids. She also commented that currently the children at Pinehurst Elementary are paying to go to Southern Pines Library. And it's a challenge for a lot of them because the distance. And our kids who are in the neighborhoods and would probably be in an area where they could walk or ride their bike to the library we're talking about putting it, don't get there as often because the parents are working. And it's a challenge. The other things to comment on was make sure there's enough space for the growing population and also for the kids that are there. She wanted to stay out of the idea of any types of books that are in there, but make sure that there was enough support for the children's sections and having the various types of books that are needed. You know, the picture books for the younger kids and the age appropriate gradations for the young teenagers and things like that. And I thought those were very wise comments coming from her. And she indicated that this would be able to be an arena in which our village can help our kids. And with what I'm seeing here, I agree that we need to adjust a little bit as to what all we put in there. And I'd like to see more technology, just like other people have mentioned. And it's going to be a multi-use facility where certainly a lot of adults can be part of it, and they're going to be the majority part of it in there, because we have more adults than we do kids in our town. But I really want to make sure we do this for the kids. The kids don't vote. The kids don't pay taxes. But you know something? It's our responsibility to educate them. It's our responsibility to make sure they have access. And I also agree that it needs to be bigger than the 90, 200 that we're talking about. But it's a compromise because the money, all right? We also need to make sure it's expandable. So I accept this as a compromise of being smaller than what we actually need, with the potential of advancing more. And I'm willing to support what's being put forward here, with the idea that we need to focus a little bit more on our technology. Our national government doesn't seem to do too good of a job. It seems like we leave our kids with a lot of debt. Maybe our local government can leave them with an education and not the debt. That's what I'd like to move forward with.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan. Barbara, you have some comments, thoughts?
I don't know that I'm going to say anything that's radically different than what anyone else has said. But I did, as I mentioned earlier, make a trip up to the Moore County Library in Carthage and spoke with three of the staff members there, which was very interesting. Their library was built 55 years ago. Ours was built 58 years ago, and we're both apparently in crisis mode at the same time. The one thing they mentioned, however, was that they had 6,500 square feet as opposed to 7,000 square feet, and I suspect that relates to the amount that's actually in the library and doesn't include staff areas or something. But they said they did not have a square foot left. What was interesting in our conversation was how different their patrons are than ours in our community. Carthage, as you well know, has a lot of building going on. There's a lot of professional activity up there related to the county seat. There are also numerous military families moving into that area as well. Interestingly, that has led to a focus on homeschooling, and that has led to an influx of people in the library pulling out books at an enormous rate, like 60 at a time. They bring in wagons, and I'm not kidding, and take them home, and that's how they are homeschooling. Very important in a military environment. I don't have to tell anyone here that, because that's family continuity as they move from place to place. It is also a high-growth area. Now, you contrast that with what we have in Pinehurst. We are a resort area. Our population is, on the average, older, and our population is plateauing in terms of growth. And that is significant in terms of what we do in the future, just as Carthage is looking at growth, and that will significantly impact what they do in the future. While they are really focused on books, hardback books, probably paperbacks too, anything they can get out of there, one of them made the comment, you know, all this you hear about electronic learning and electronic this, that, and the other thing is just not true up here. They want books. That is significantly different than what we have here, because we have 97+% of our population that is connected to the internet. Radically different. And the reason I think that this is important is that as we look at, well, as a matter of fact, if you were to build 2 libraries today, one in Pinehurst, one in Carthage, they would be completely different. And yet, what is happening, and this really piggybacks to something John said, what happens is we're using industry standards for everyone across the board. 1 square foot per capita, 3.9 items per capita. Our populations are driving what is determining what we're putting in our libraries and how many square feet we need. And I think that can be deceiving when we ought to be looking at some additional factors. And those additional factors might be things like, as I just mentioned, the community profile, with current and future needs based on growth requirements. Secondly, and I think this is really important as well, surrounding related resources and their proximity. We need to consider what is around us that we can utilize. We don't have to rebuild, especially when you look at, and I'm not suggesting we don't build a new library. I do think we need to build a new library. I am suggesting that as we look around us, why make redundant recommendations when we have things that we can use, for example? And these would all be within close proximity of where we are going to put our new facility. We have archives, and another important point. Carthage has a section that is dedicated to their local history. Our local history is in the archives. We don't need that space. Is that factored into the per capita factor? I don't know, but I suspect it is. Secondly, we have a community center with meeting rooms, as we have talked about. We need to factor in our high rate of internet connectivity, and we've talked about that in terms of reduced numbers of shelves and more opportunity for electronic media. We also have Village Place, where we are, places to meet there as well, and we charge for them. Just thought I'd throw that in. Given Memorial Bookstore, another resource for us. And libraries that are associated with academic institutions in the area, not the least of which is Sand Hills Community College and all that it has to offer. And I'm not suggesting these as replacements. I think that they should be considerations, because another one of our important considerations is the budget. And in order to make good decisions, I think we need to expand beyond per capita. Other considerations, by the way, as far as Pinehurst is concerned, is our National Historic Landmark status. We have looked at, apparently, using the current building for the library and moving archives. That did not work out. There was not a sufficient or a decent place to take archives. And so that left us with the existing building. Expanding that footprint is iffy. From a National Historic Landmark status, and I have more thoughts on that, but I'll spare you for now. And we have an agreement with the Given Memorial Library and the Tufts Archives, which deserves consideration. And by the way, in that agreement is an agreement to reach out to the USGA and to the resort to see what their participation in all of this might be, and we intend to do that. So, one last thought. I think comparing us with regional libraries is apples to oranges. I don't think we need to be a regional library. I think we are surrounded by communities with libraries, some of them regional, some of them part of our own region. I think we need to focus on a library that reflects our village character, just as we do every other building that we put in Pinehurst. I'm done.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. I want to thank all my colleagues for their comments, thoughtful comments in the beginning of a discussion. I will say this, I too had no plans tonight at all to do anything more than discuss this. so I don't see a rush to judgment. I stated last time we met, I guess, and discussed this, my view of setting some parameters, because we had never had some. And so I'm glad to have generated this conversation. So let me go back and answer a couple of the questions that were raised. You raised the old question about Lydia Bosch, what do our residents really want? So I went back to the original library IQ needs assessment, because it's consistently been suggested, always, right in front of that, is statistically valid. So I went back, and if you go to page 36 in Library IQ, I will read to you from the online public survey. This, by the way, this was completed, an online survey was conducted January 27th to March 2nd, 2020. The President of the United States declared a pandemic on March 25th. So this survey was done all before that. The survey was available at engage.vopnc.org/library and was completed by 386 Pinehurst residents. Where it says, a survey completed by 400 residents is a statistically valid sample size for a population of less than 100,000 people. So by their own numbers, they are suggesting in their online survey that there's some invalidity to what they have come forth with. Now, they did say, note, this analysis includes only respondents who live in the village of Pinehurst. Good. Next sentence, next paragraph. Again, from Library IQ, page 36. The survey successfully reached both library users and non-users. Good. 63% of the respondents had used the given library during the past 12 months, while 37% had not. Now, we know from the 3 ETC surveys that we have seen for the last 3 years, the usage numbers are opposite of that, almost identically opposite. 60% are non-users, 40% are. So in essence, the sort of foundation for a lot of what the people, their desires and what they want, I think are a bit distorted, which I believe the ETC survey is more respective of. But go ahead.
Yeah, I don't want to interrupt you, but.
No, go right ahead on that point. I'm curious.
Yeah, so what you're talking about, the online survey was done on Engage Pinehurst. It was self-selected, so it is not statistically valid at all.
Well, but we've continually referred to it as statistically valid.
No,
Two different surveys.
yeah, two different surveys. There was an ETC survey that was valid.
The ETC survey is a different survey.
Yes, right, correct.
And they have done 3 in the last 11.
No, okay, so the ETC did a survey as part of the needs assessment, which was not this online survey.
But the 3 they did that I referenced, the last 3 years.
Yep,
were
the annual.
Absolutely the opposite of the makeup of the respondents to this survey.
Yep,
And
roughly 60% have
Okay,
not
so
used the library each year.
So, to me, that causes me to question a lot of the sort of the fundamental assumptions of this is what, when we say this is what our residents want, or this is what they desire, they've expressed the needs for these things. Well, I question that. So I also went back and I also went to, looked up the Pew survey. Pew does a lot of research on libraries. And they said the high watermark for library visits was in 2012, which was at 53% of the population. In 2015, it dropped to 44%. So I asked them for something more recent. They said we've stopped surveying on that question. The ETC capital priority surveys of 2021, 2022, and 2023 indicated that our residents always rated, among our capital priorities, the library in the bottom quarter. They rated it, I think it was 8th every year. Again, indication, now I'm for a library, okay? I've just got a question about whether or not the needs that we're professing that our public wants is accurate, which is why I question the size. Now, let me go to the comparisons with other libraries. And it was touched on, I think, by Barb. 6 of the 8 libraries we were compared with were county libraries. Richmond, Hoke, Scotland. I agree, it's sort of apples and oranges. Southern Pines and Aberdeen are an interesting comparison, but one of the things we need to truly study is our growth rates. Pinehurst, Southern Pines, and Aberdeen, they differ in a couple of categories on that issue. One has to do with population, percentage of population under 14 years of age. Aberdeen, 22.9%. Southern Pines, 16.8%. Pinehurst, 13.8%. We're the smallest kid on the block when it comes to our population, and that indicates. Now, what about the average annual population rate for the last 10 years, the growth rate? Pinehurst, 1.9%. Southern Pines, 2.5%. Aberdeen, 3.4%. They're growing faster than us, and their population under 14 is bigger than us. Someone else mentioned the idea, again, I got from Library IQ, the issue of us being a digital village. I forget which, it's on one of their pages, page 24. 93.8% of Pinehurst residents have one or more type of computing device. 90% of households have a desktop or a laptop. 91% of households have an internet subscription. 90% of households have a broadband connection. This explains a little bit by what a lot of our residents don't use the library. So I want to build a library for the 21st century for Pinehurst. I'm really not into the industry standards of what they do in Rhode Island or Massachusetts or Wisconsin. And I encourage us to think about that as we take our next step here. The budget history is an interesting one. As we all know, this has grown over time, which is understandable. We've had inflation. But originally, when I went back and looked at some of the old budget numbers, it was $3.5 million, and at that time, it was going to be debt financed. But that was about 3 years ago. Then we increased it to 4.6, and we dropped the debt financing. But every time we talked about money, all through, the last time I could find this was April of this past year, the number in our budget was to cover both the library and the archives. We sort of have morphed away from that. I'm not going to try to force, 10 pounds of sand into a 5-pound bag. I see the situation that we're facing. But it's a reason for us to be extra frugal, because we don't know what that end number is. And as look at the numbers here, there's a low estimate, there's a high estimate, and then it keeps going. We saw the survey about taxes. 43 of our residents would not pay a single penny more for a library costs. 31% said they pay a penny. All right. So I went back and took the variety of possible square footage amounts. You had said 450, you said 475, we're saying 450 to 500. So per square foot. Fair, that's the way people build things. If we were to build a 7,600 square foot library at $550 a square foot, it would be $4.1 million. If we were to build an 8,000 square foot library at $550 per square foot, it would be $4.4 million. If we were to build an 8,400 square foot library at $550 a square foot, which is $50 more or whatever it is than with the most recent thing we spoke about. That would come to $4.62 million. Now, happens to dovetail with the number that we've kicked around, about 4.6 million, but that was to do both the library and the archives. But like I said, that ship has sailed.
Yeah, I just want to make a point here, so that the cost per square foot is the construction cost. On top of that construction cost is the FF&E, the owner's contingency, and the architect's fee. So
how much does that add to it?
So those were built into these numbers, but you can't do it for so an 8,400 square foot library is 5.6 million. You can't do the 84,000 times 550 because you have to take a percentage for those other costs.
So, well, that's even scarier. I thought the 550 was going to be the all-in cost for the building of the square footage. So what you're telling me is that what's proposed is that the computers, the digital wiring, the media costs, the LED equipment, whatever the hell else we use, is not in our numbers?
No, and Pat, to be fair, I think the way Oakley Collier presented it, they gave you a construction cost, and then there were some additional things. And they ranged anywhere from, in the old option one, $1.5 million on top of $525 a square foot times a size.
So,
Outfitting, yeah.
so we're gonna, I'll take the 1.5 million.
That was option one. Option three, it was closer to $1 million on top of the 450 to 500 a square foot high and low estimate.
Yeah, so on the slide real quick, this shows what the cost would be for these different square footages. And that, to note, that's the library only. The archives would be an additional 1.4-ish million.
So 5.6 million is what it would be all in for 8,400 square feet.
Correct.
Okay. See, I thought it was going to be less than that based on the number that I was
Yeah,
seeing.
no, I understand.
Maybe I missed it, but I kept making a note of the amount of the dollars per square footage. Well, that doesn't help me at all because I was hoping to get us to a number that would be more practical and that our residents would be more understanding of. I too am a little bit concerned about the digital part. And by the way, as someone who has volunteered at the Pinehurst Elementary School Library on a few occasions, I can tell you they have a very nice library there. According to our fiscal year ended June 30th, 2023, which has some great information on it from the library and from other organizations within the village. The number of books checked out of our library is down 28% from a high of 45,000 in 2019. In 2023, it was down to 32,000. Now, we went through a period of COVID, but we're in the post-COVID era. The number of ebooks checked out, in the last 10 years increased by 165% at our library. It was 8,373 10 years ago, and it was 22,248 last year. We currently exceed every Moore County library in the percentage of digital materials circulated at 26%. Southern Pines is at 18%. I got that on page 12 of the needs assessment. So I'm a big skeptic of this idea that we need a lot more books on shelves. We need some. I am curious, one of my questions will be, of the 15,000 or 17,000 book collection, whatever the number is, I'm curious of how many of those books go out the door, either to the homeschoolers or to someone else every year, and how many don't. Maybe you know that answer.
I can answer that question because we are so small, we weed regularly. If a book has not been checked out in 3 years, it goes. 3 years. Some libraries keep books for 10 years.
So then we are replenishing the books regularly.
Yes.
That's good to know. Thank you. I let me finish up here and something I've somewhat stated before, but I think we need to compare where we are now to where we're going, not compare ourselves to some other aspirational idea of what a library should be, our size, whether it's based on per capita, whether it's based on population. So where are we now? Well, the library occupies 0.63 acre plot of land that it shares with the Tufts. They have 0 designated parking spots. They've had 0 spots for 60 years. The square footage is 3,825. The room for expansion, 0. Volume of books, about 17,000. OC, Oakley Collier, recommends 36,000. I think that's way off. Programs we offer a lot of programs. But obviously we can offer more if we have a bigger library. FTE-wise, this goes to the issue of our operating costs downstream. I think we have about 5 FTEs now. Audrey, I'm sure you can correct me if I'm off. 4, okay. We're going to need 10 probably. Let's be realistic because we're going to have 2 buildings. We're not ADA compliant right now. It's not our fault. It was built pre-ADA. The ADA passed in 1992. Storage space, minimal. So what if we went to the 8,400 square feet? That's a 120% increase in the size from our current library. That's a phenomenal, it's more than doubling our current size. And we go from 30 designated parking spots, or, as in one of the OC's earlier diagrams they gave us, they were putting 38 as a number of designated parking spots. The property size itself would go from 0.63 acres to 2.2 acres or so, which would be solely the libraries. That's a 150% increase in size. Would there be room for expansion? Absolutely. We have to build room for expansion because what if that library is the biggest thing since the building of Pinehurst No. 2? Well, we want to be sure that we can get a lot of people off on their tea times. I mentioned earlier about the volume of books. I'm very skeptical of that. We'll be compliant. We'll have storage space. There's a lot to be said for what we can build within a budget. It's now a bigger budget than I thought it would be even. It's disappointing to me. But we've really got to compare ourselves to where we are and where we can get to. And what do our taxpayers and our residents think about that when we know that most of them don't use the library? I was always hopeful that we would expand it there. It's not worked out. Though there are some people kicking around different ideas. I don't think that's going to work. But I'm open to that suggestion. If someone has a silver bullet of how we can turn that, because I'll tell you, one of the things I found in the Oakley Collier, August 29th, Gibbon Memorial Library and Tufts Archives expansion diagram that was given to me, they, on page 53, drew up a Gibbon Library new program. It says, based on individual user group meetings and facility walkthrough, the following program summary was developed to meet the current needs for the facility. So I think this is when they were developing the library to be over there. Over there meaning where it is.
Right.
And they were assuming basically to give them all the space. Because they drew up a plan, total gross square footage required, 8,075. And they've got it all broken out, right down to, I don't know how much they cut the size of your office, but they have your name in this. And then they also developed another one for a heated square footage area of 6,300 square feet. Now, obviously, it's just some water under the bridge because there have been various other diagrams. But like I said, I went back and read everything that it was ever handed off to me. And so I'd like to see a library that we can be proud of. I'd like to see one that we can expand in the future. But I'd like to see one that is somewhere in the ballpark of the dollars we've talked about. I'm not opposed to debt financing. I believe it's a tool. It's often used. It's a financial instrument. I'd prefer to avoid that if we could. But I think if we're going to tell the public that we're going to build a library that's going to cost more than we've ever told you before, and we're going to debt finance it, there are not going to be champagne bottles popping in the streets of Pinehurst. We have a constituency out there. We have a residence. So that's where I'm at this point. I'd like us to find a library that works for Pinehurst, that looks like Pinehurst. I agree with everybody on that. I'd like to find one we can expand, that people can park at. But I'm very wary of these square footage numbers where we keep talking about the needs and the wants of our village residents when I don't see that in a lot of data. And I don't hear it too much, but that's something I have to debate with people who have other ideas. Anyway, I got my 2 cents in like everybody else.
Can I ask a question real quick here?
Yeah.
How many personnel will be required to run the archives and the proposed library here?
We have built-in estimates into the 5-year projection, and
Is that where it goes?
I think you should probably answer that.
Well, actually, it's hard for me to answer when I don't know how many square feet they're going to be, but we do know there's going to be 2 locations.
The 9,250, assume that.
Yeah, well, it's a question of supervision and things like that. Somebody has to be in different areas, and et cetera, et cetera. We have tried to figure that out, and I think that we are planning, is it?
Dana, what's in the budget?
Answer what we put in the budget.
Yeah, so at least what we have in the budget currently, in the 5-year forecast, is 4 additional FTEs on top of the ones that already are working for the village. In the first year, it's about plus so salaries and benefits for 4 new FTEs, plus estimates for additional operating costs, assuming a 10,000 square foot building, so utilities, additional maintenance costs, insurance, et cetera, cleaning. The first year in 2026, we have about 400,000 added to the budget for those additional costs for salaries and benefits and operating.
So the total amount is 8, from what you're saying. We have 4 now and 4 more?
Right.
Okay, so total 8 there.
Yep, and then that cost is just escalated for inflation in the future years
Thank you.
in the plan.
I got another question. Pat, you read an excerpt at the start of your information there, or your presentation. Would you mind reading that again real quick here? Where it was not statistically valid?
Yes.
Please read that again.
An online survey was conducted January 27th through March 2nd of 2020. The survey was available at blah, 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 and was completed by 386 Pinehurst residents. A survey completed by 400 residents is statistically valid sample size for a population less than 100,000.
Okay, so effectively on there, and they say it's statistically valid, statistical validity is a math problem. And if you go to Survey Clutch, it gives you all the different numbers there. So if you have a population, I overestimated here, of 19,000, they did it, it's probably less than that, it's probably 18.
Fine, I'll take your 19.
To get a statistically valid survey of plus or minus 5%, which is the accepted standard in most scientific journals, you'd have to have 377. So effectively, what they were telling you is that less than 100,000, it'd have to be 400. But what we have, because we have a much smaller number than that, it is statistically valid.
Well-
with a plus or minus 5.
I'm just reading what they have.
I understand,
And
but
now-
my
and-
point
and-
on there is the way they phrased that may not have been the best way. They did tell you it was statistically valid, okay? And it is statistically valid per the math. But they phrased it there saying that's 400, which means close by for 100,000 people, okay?
Okay.
So what I'm getting is the science and the math of this, okay? The math on there from Survey Clutch, if you'd like to look at their different math problems.
No, I don't
There's
think
another
you're for it.
equation, I can give that if you want to work it out yourself. But effectively, it's 377 for statistical validity. Here's what I'm bringing up on there, is that you started out with a statement saying it's not statistically valid.
Right, but
I think it
read
is
this.
statistically valid
I
because
understand.
the math says it is statistically valid with a plus or minus 5%.
I'm telling you what they said in
got
a
it.
product we paid for.
But how they presented that was less than 100,000 people. We have 1/5 of 100,000 people in our village.
Okay?
Okay, so when you read that and you try to analyze it, and what are they saying? They have already told you it's statistically valid. My point is, the numbers on there is 386 people responded. All you need was 377 for 5% plus or minus, okay?
All right.
That's the math.
Okay, now let's go to the
Okay?
math on the second part.
Before that, okay, we talked about this before, about 10 people is what you said to be there. When we looked at the for analysis from our staff, it's 8 people from there. My point on this is that when you start looking at the data,
Yeah.
and you have, let's say, blue-colored glasses on,
Yeah.
all you're going to see is blue.
Sure.
Okay, so you're going to be biased in what you're doing. So what I heard from you,
Yes.
in my opinion, was a biased assessment in there, saying this is you're trying to not do this, when what we have got is a good presentation about what's going on with our library, okay?
You-
There's an old saying in medicine that's a joke, actually, on surgeons.
Yes.
And it's that they may be wrong, but they're never in doubt.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
that's very old.
So very old on there. My concern here is that you're looking at the data from a skewed perspective because you're trying to show it does not need to occur. I'm just trying to look at this from an unbiased perspective.
Oh, I understand how unbiased you are, okay? But we'll put your unbiasedness aside, and let's go to the second part of that. Their survey was made up of 63% of respondents who had used the library in the last 12 months. Now, we know from the ETC survey for the last 3 years that 60% of our residents don't use it. How's that for your unbiased statistical surveying?
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? Is the survey that he referred to, is that the one that you, Doug, said is not statistically valid because of its people who volunteered to send it in? Regardless of what the numbers are, and I'm sure you're right on the math. I'm not questioning the math here.
Being clear that I don't know exactly what Pat's pointing to. There was a statistically invalid survey as part of the needs assessment. It was just an online survey. People could go on and fill their things out. There was also a statistically valid survey that ETC did by randomly selecting
Yeah,
appropriate
this does not
population.
cite ETC. This cites Engage at VOPNC. And that's, again, it's Appendix 3, which is referenced elsewhere. And that's where I got it from. I'm not making this stuff up.
Yeah, ultimately, we have to give guidance to the staff as to what direction we want to go.
Yeah.
Okay? What are the parameters, as you mentioned before, that we're going to give them for their marching orders?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we need to come up with tonight. That's what I'm understanding of this whole conversation, correct?
I mean,
I think there's been so much data on this accumulated, particularly in the last 6 years, since we chose the consultants, that there's probably something for everybody, you know, here. I guarantee you that. And so we can pick and choose what we want, but I think we have to step back and say, with our knowledge of the community, what makes sense, and our knowledge of, you know, researching library and trends and other libraries and so forth. And that's where I'm coming from. So I'm not trying to cite a particular paragraph out of a particular document. I think it's the bigger picture that leads us to give a conclusion. And I think whatever that conclusion is, and I respect whatever council decides to do, but I think that's the way I approach it.
I think the number in the middle there is the compromise. I think that's the most sensible one.
Can I offer just one
Sure.
possible point of clarification as well? What I heard in this discussion from a couple of you was that we shouldn't be adhering to the industry standards because we're a unique community. And I think all of us actually agree with that. And in fact, this proposed design does not adhere to industry standards. Both of you that brought up the point of industry standards called out the 1 square foot per resident.
I did not.
I did
I
not.
cited the books,
yep.
books per capita,
Yep.
but someone else did.
This is
yes.
almost exactly half that. And I think Doug made that point when he was sharing the numbers for it. Those numbers are there for reference and to point out that we are under all of those benchmarks in every respect.
And if I could make another comment to you, talk about the percentage of people who don't use the library. Part of it is because we don't have what they need or want. We don't have the books they want, we don't have, we are trying our best, but we cannot make everybody happy. We are trying to do what we can for the people who come in. But it's like if you go to the grocery store. You go to the grocery store and you want a steak, and you go in, they got hot dogs and they got sausages and bologna. So you go somewhere else. Next time you want a steak, you go, I'm not going to go there because they didn't have steak last time. They might not have it this time, so I'm going to save myself a trip and I'm going to go to the store that has steak.
According to this survey data, the top 2 reasons that non-users don't go to the library is they have internet access at home or work, or they prefer to get books and materials elsewhere. It's not that they don't like the library. I mean,
And another thing, too, is
What are the other
a
reasons? Pat?
significant portion of our population will pay $60 to go to Southern Pines because we don't have what they want.
there's a small percentage, I'll find the exact results, there's a small percentage that don't have parking.
My point is, you're never going to get 100% participation in a library program.
I'm not trying to.
But there are going to be people that are going to be encouraged to come to a better library that better meets the needs of them and their family.
You're not going to get 100% of the people to go to the splash pad.
Or the rec, or the community center, or
And we're not going to make everyone happy no matter what we decide.
Exactly.
That I'm certain of.
Reasons over 55.
Statistically valid.
Non-users do not use the library. I'm reading right from the survey. Is they have internet access at home, prefer to buy their own books and materials, or the library is not important to them. These are not people who are wandering around the streets. This is just the way they are.
I think you get similar responses from people in every community.
I agree.
What is our intent tonight?
That's, we're trying to provide parameters.
Well, what is our hope for outcome in the next 2 minutes or 2 hours, whatever it's going to be?
And actually, maybe to that point, can I offer a suggestion? So we can go tit for tat. I think Jack is right. We can all pick statistics that recognize our point of view on this. I think maybe rather than looking at statistics and points of, and looking at it that way, I think we need to look at it the programming way. Okay, we have this many things in our library. This is what we want to have in our library, and maybe we can come more easily to a consensus that way rather than the industry benchmarks or standards like that.
How big an egg we want?
That's yes.
I think the egg at 92.50 is the route I'll go with.
Well, I like the other eggs, but I'll settle for the 8,400 grade A egg. Boy, that dollar thing, it just keeps, it's grown to me. That's my surprise tonight is the dollar.
Can maybe make just one other observation here, which is a potential exposure, and I'm not saying that there's any way around it, but these are, at the end of the day, estimates.
I know the problem.
And estimates can be wrong. With the best of intentions, we don't know. I think we need to guard against, as a council, as fiduciaries of taxpayer money, that the number not exceed something. So we may go in thinking it's going to be 5.6 million, but you can't come back and, well, it's 6.5 million, or take it or leave it. And I don't know what that number is. I don't know where you draw that ceiling, but
I couldn't agree more. We should not pick a target. We should pick a not to exceed amount, because that's the only way you discipline a consultant and a contractor. feel strongly about that.
And to the extent that they've come back and, sorry, can't do it, well, that's a conversation you have in advance, not when they're presenting you with the bill. We
Yeah.
can't be
If
ordering
you
a dinner,
reduced-
we can't be ordering dinner off a menu with no prices.
If you reduce the 36,000 book, the volume of books you want to expand to from 17,000, if you reduce that to 25,000, how much square footage would you give back?
Honestly, I don't think it would be that much because most of the shelving is along walls that are going to be existing.
We had 10 books per square foot. I'm going to do the quick math,
Yeah.
it'd be 1,100 square feet.
Well, but we're not at 10 books per square foot. We're almost half of that.
Yeah.
So
That's what we're trying to get to.
Why? I'm sorry, I don't,
Right,
I'm not being
so-
argumentative, but
Yeah,
why?
yeah, yeah.
That's
So-
the benchmark versus where this, what this
Right.
design actually accommodates.
Right, so
Back to my earlier point.
to step back, benchmarks say you should have 66,000 books. We're not doing that. They have 35,000 listed. Normally, you'd have 3,500 square feet to put those books in. We only have 2,000 square feet to put those books in. So even eliminating that to 25,000, you're going to get maybe 300 square feet.
I may be slow here. You are saying that in the floor plan, despite a recommendation that we have 36,000 by, they only allocated how many square feet?
2,000 square feet. So,
Enough for 20,000 books if you assume 10.
right, so what we're assuming is that it's not 10 books per square feet. It's much denser.
So you're either getting skinny books or,
Well, what we're doing is going higher and lower.
But you're still getting 36,000 volumes.
Yes.
That's the number.
Right, so, yes, the benchmark at 10 books per square foot probably assumes that you're at like a 4-foot shelf, and we're saying we're going ceiling to floor shelves,
You're getting more books in the allocated space.
more
by going
dense
higher.
space.
So you got to be Wilt Chamberlain to go pick out a book.
Using,
Well, that, and then also, there's also security, because if the shelves, you saw the shelves, how high they're, you have to be able to see, or else someone's going to be patrolling all the time.
I saw in the shelves at Carthage, I didn't know what they were until Audrey explained them to me. They tilt the shelves intentionally. I thought they were having trouble with gravity.
Gravity,
But they
yeah.
tilt them so it's easier for people to read the spine of the book and pick their book out, or have to go down like this. So
Another thing that I wanted to mention, and John, this was, I think, a comment that you made about people who use the archives. A lot of local people use the archives. Realtors, people who live in historic homes, as you well know, and people bring their guests, their families, and they visit regularly, periodically, and Jack, you know that.
I'm sure
All the
that's right,
time
but I'm
you've
just
spent in
saying-
there. I mean, I don't think it's fair to say it's just visitors and people who use the archives, or people who come here to golf.
I'm not making a black and white 100-0. People don't bring their kids to story hour in the archives, right? They buy a historic house,
know-
or they're thinking they may want to know the story.
I will say the schools come to the archives. The schools bring their classes to the archives. We've had first, we've had second, we've had fifth, and they come on their little Christmas walk, they go get hot chocolate, they come to the archives, they have a
They're
fact
just there for
hunt.
the hot chocolate.
They're-
Don't let them tell you about the
I'm not
archives.
giving them hot chocolate, I'm giving them a fact hunt where they looked in the cases and
there
found
was a
the
page
answers.
in your presentation where the Oakley Collier recommendation was 9,038 square feet.
Yeah,
What happened to that one?
and that doesn't include, that was just their programming. It doesn't include like some of the riser space or the electrical. things like that.
Bathrooms.
When I look at this, when I take a step back, this is what they're proposing, and I try to look at it like, okay, what would I eliminate? And I have a difficult time finding something that I think is appropriate to eliminate. If council has direction on what to look at, to talk to the architects about exploring that, I can do that. But right now, I have a difficult time saying, collection space, I mentioned 2,000, it's actually 3,000 square feet. So if we reduced it from 36,000 to 25,000, we could save maybe 400 square feet there. Is that what we want? The 3,000 square feet is the same size as Carthage was. When I walk into the Carthage library, I don't feel like that's a big enough space for a collection that a library that Pinehurst would want to build is.
typical library of the future is not dependent on the number of volumes of books we have on shelves. I just don't see that coming. The
And I-
iPhone was invented in 2009. We're, that's not it. Cartridges, that's 55 years old, and I don't know, other than that kiosk, I don't know what's changed in that library. God bless them, but ours is going to be
It's very true.
ours is going to be a state-of-the-art library, I would anticipate.
Yes, but the number of books that, when you're going from 66,000, that's the recommendation, to a third of that, I think we have already reduced this much more than industry standards would say, much more than what someone that walks into a library that's 7,000 square feet would say that it should be reduced by.
Have we narrowed the choices at all since we started 2-3 years ago? I think we have.
Narrowed what,
We've
Which
narrowed
choices
it
are you talking
down
about,
to a
Jack?
few options, I believe. I mean, we're really
Are
talking.
you talking about drawings, or are you talking
I'm
about,
talking about the absolute drawing. I'm talking about the absolute, let's take the square footage. It seems to me we've narrowed down to a range, okay? And how do we break out of this, what appears to be an impasse? I mean, we got to find a way to, we either take the size and the programming, or we consider the cost. You know, one of these factors has to be a dominating decision maker. I'm not sure which it is at this point in time, but I'd be interested in others' thoughts on that.
One of my reasons, probably the major one, is to minimize the amount of square footage from, again, increasing the square footage by 120%, but keeping it as at a minimum compared to the industry standards and all that other thing, is because that will drive the cost, as we can see from the discussion. The size
but-
of that footprint is going to drive the cost,
But
which is why
Pat-
I want to leave room for expansion.
the area in the front of the library?
Say that again?
The area in the front of the library is like 3,600 square feet. You got where you sit and where the kids are. You say you increase it by 100 square feet, 100%, 120%, you're only going to have twice that amount. And you know, you've been in there, you know it's too small.
I'm not, have I said it's too small? I agree with that, but you're going to get to design the library. You're not going to be bound by the current brick and mortar and the shape of it. You're going to get to design it. That improves its efficiency. But the bigger that footprint, the bigger the cost is going to be to the taxpayers. There's no question in my mind.
well, that's certainly true, but the difference is $500,000 from what you're proposing to what we were proposing. And I guess this is a council question, is how important is that $500,000? Is that something that the council can live with and over 15 years spread that cost out? Or is that something that,
Well, one of the things I said a couple weeks ago, a month ago, whatever it was, my concern is that we're spending millions of dollars on this one way or another, okay? And I don't want to spend millions of dollars and not meet the mission of having a library that we need, okay? And that's kind of the argument on here. And Jack, I agree with you. You know, we have to kind of look at this as which one's the priority on that. This is already a compromise. The 9250 is a compromise already, and again, going down away from the industry standards. And so I see that as a compromise because I fully agree that I don't want to spend too much money on there also. We've been given a range of what that is. The longer we wait, the higher that's going to go. There's no question about that. And I think we need to make a decision. Okay, where do you stand on it? What guidance are we going to give them?
Excuse me, Dana, did you have something to say?
I was just going to add one other thing to keep in mind regarding the budget and expansion as it relates to, you know, what square footage might we pick now or say is appropriate now. The smaller you make it now, the sooner we will outgrow it.
Well,
But
And-
where do you come up with that assumption?
can I actually,
And just thinking about then spending an extra 500,000 now to gain that additional square footage versus having to spend even more money to do an addition in the nearer future, just
but
something to keep in mind.
there was something
I
that-
haven't done numbers on it yet, but it's something to consider.
there's a number that was in here somewhere that I had a lot of other numbers I could have cited, and I didn't. But somewhere there was a projection by 2040, the population of Pinehurst is going to be 23,000 people. We're at 18,500 now. That's a difference of 4,500. The typical way you think about residences is 2.2 people per residence. So to have 4,500 more people here, we need 2,000 more units. We don't have that, not in our current footprint, not at any reasonable density that I can see planning and zoning approving. What was the estimate of number of buildable lots we have, not counting Pineweld? 500, something like that? It was 600 or 700, and,
Yeah, it was closer to 1,000 than that.
well,
But it has
it's
been,
not 2,000.
the numbers are coming down every year, but, yeah.
It's not 2,000. And,
But
and
that's
so,
that's just what's currently platted. I mean, you have all Pinehurst South, and Phase 5 wasn't in that
I understand.
calculation. And, you know,
Dan, can I clear, did you say that the expected incremental cost was $400,000 a year? That included 4 full-time equivalents plus cleaning and what have you?
Correct.
How is it that Southern Pines spends $1 million on an 14,000 square foot library?
11,000.
So,
Yeah, so-
that's the incremental additional cost.
Right. The current library budget is about 600,000. So basically, it would take us from 600 to $1 million.
I thought I saw a line in the
But
recent budget that
what-
had $1 million for the library.
Wait a minute, again, they've got.
Library's operating budget?
Yes.
No, no.
Yes. So in the future, roughly $1 million operating costs, which is, like you said, very
400,000 more than we're paying now.
600,000. Yeah. Which is, like you said, similar to Southern Pines.
So our 8,000 or 9,000 square foot library is going to be $400,000, and Southern Pines, whatever their library size, I've forgotten with all the numbers here, is $1 million. It's not,
Between the
Crazy.
archives and the library, we think we can operate at $1 million.
Well, let me make a suggestion.
I think they've got 3 librarians, don't they?
Who's that?
Yeah.
Who's that?
They're heavily staffed.
At one point, they had 11.
Yeah.
When we started talking about it and comparing Southern Pines to it, they had 11 libraries, like a children's
Dana,
research club.
Could you check, I thought one of the budget resolutions we voted on in the last 3 years had a line in there for the library of $1 million.
That was to transfer $1 million from the general fund to the library capital
In the budget
project.
resolution itself?
Yes.
Well, that's what I remember. Okay.
That was not related to operating costs.
Well, let me pose an alternative. That we take the square footage up from 8,400 square feet to 8,800 square feet, and we have a contract that says not to exceed $5.6 million. How does that grab folks? Okay? We can make a decision. Now, I understand, go ahead.
no, but my question, is that something that, shouldn't we go back to Oakley Collier and give them that as a challenge and have
That's
them
what
say
we should
yes or
tell them.
no?
That's
Right.
what we should tell them.
Anyway, so
That's one
you
way
said
to-
5
That's
point,
one way to break it. I mean, you're right. I mean, that's one way to look at it. I just want to tell you, I'm coming from, what are the programs? What are the activities? What do we want to sponsor? What are the types of things we want this library to do and how it to serve the community? And based on that, what is the necessary square footage to do that? And so that's why I believe that they've made a reasonable attempt to satisfy that and have come up with 9250. And that's where I'm coming from. It's as simple as that. Maybe that's a little bit naive, but that's where I'm coming from.
I concur.
I don't want to disrupt that conversation because I think that's the way to go. But right now, 8,400 is expected to cost 5.6 million. So to say, go up to 88 and keep the same budget, that's the midpoint.
So, put that up, back up on the screen. Can you get that? There you go. So, again, 8,400 is 5.6 million. That 5.6 million is short 1 point something million?
to get to what we want to build is 6.1, so it's a $500,000. So to go to 8,800
Yeah.
is saving, what, 250, 300? Like,
To reduce it, you're saving all your bills going out until you expand. So, smaller the footprint, the smaller the utility bills, the
but that's the size of a closet. I mean, that's not that big.
well,
It's-
if it's really not that big a thing, why don't we just agree to it? I mean, you know, what?
If it doesn't change the staffing, there's no appreciable savings there.
Well, I'm not after the staffing, I'm after the footprint. I just think we're putting too much down there when the residents have told us for 3 years in a row that 60% of them don't use it. They told us they don't want to pay more than they don't want to pay a penny, not a penny in increased taxes. We have recent information from them.
Keep in mind also that that's not the only number. You got to add somewhere between $1.4 million and $2.3 million. Those are the outside ranges on renovation of the existing building. So it's not 5.6.
I keep forgetting
It's
about that.
7 to 8.9.
Sure, but the
7.9,
difference
sorry.
between what the mayor has proposed and what the Oakley Collier has suggested is $500,000.
Well,
And if you go up to 8,800 square feet, the difference is probably going to be about
100,000.
There's an old saying that was attributed to Illinois Senator Dirksen that a billion here, a billion there, pretty soon you're talking real money.
You think
Now,
that
there's
was,
actually some debate as to whether he ever actually said that, but
was that Milton Friedman or was that Dirksen?
that was Dirksen.
Okay.
Allegedly.
I just wondered, because Milton Friedman was very focused on spending at one time.
I think we got to be careful that you can nickel and dime your way to a big number. And
That's a fair concern. At this point, maybe, you know, I can reach out to council can reach out to me. If there's somewhere that you can suggest that we can reduce it in one of these program areas, please let me know. I can go back to the architects and we can see how that would
Look,
affect.
I'd have to study it further, but I think if you reduce the shelving, about the volume of books, I think if you reduce the size of the living room a little. I call it
Jack
the
made a
living-
couple of suggestions also.
Jack made a couple of suggestions,
Space.
meeting room space.
Yeah, we can look at all those and I can come back with an analysis of, okay, if we reduce meeting room space, we're going from a 480 square foot room to a 200.
But keep in mind this, people who use our library now will be going into a brand-new library that's bigger than they've ever seen in their lives. They're not going to be going into the library and thinking, oh my gosh, I thought this was going to be a few thousand square feet bigger.
I disagree. I think that we run a risk of having people come in and saying, oh, they built the Taj Mahal, what a mess. And I think we also run the risk of like, why did they build this thing so darn small? Because
But if we did, we have room for expansion.
which will cost much more per square
It's
foot.
always going to cost
future.
more if you expand down the road. I mean, of course.
Then why not just do it
Making
now?
our point, yeah.
I don't think right now we can justify that amount of dollars.
I think from my perspective, there are enough people in the community expressing a point of view, and we have the statistics on it, to suggest that if you build it, they will not come. Now, there may be other people who are not coming now who will. I don't know how to balance that.
Yeah,
I wish I were that smart.
I find, like any statistic that we've talked about tonight, it can go one way or the other. But the library right now is so small, so cramped, so awful. Sorry. I feel like,
That's harsh. Harsh.
and this is very anecdotal. When I interviewed here, the library is the first place I went. I walked in, it was like, this is not a community I want to live in.
So what changed your mind?
Grandparents.
It wasn't me.
Well,
Ultimately, we need to give some guidance to the staff. Okay?
Why don't we give them guidance and say, tell us how much it costs to build an 8,800 square foot library. Let's see what they come back with a hard number. Let's see what's included in that number.
We can do that math. It's not hard.
yeah.
Well, I don't know how hard it is. I just, I keep learning about how much more it's going to cost.
It'll be 5.8 to 5.9.
We had a
But that's
similar
before we get to
conversation
the
back in
archives.
like October, and I told you the difference was going to be $500,000, and it wound up being 480. So
Well, if we're going to have a library twice the size we have now, you'll have more room for programs than you've ever dreamed of.
I don't think so.
I think so. You've been in that library, we've been there for 60 years. And now we're on the cusp of getting a new library, state of the art, without a lot of that awkwardness in there. And, well, the awkwardness at the design you have to work around. That's, you can't go in there with a demolition day and change it at your will. And you're gonna have people who can actually come there and park their car.
I propose we give the staff the guidance to go with the 9250 and stay within the range that's been provided for the financing. Other council members, are you going to give guidance of what you want to do?
I would be lower than that. I would actually stay at the 8,400 square feet and ask them to get out a sharp pencil rather than these range of estimates. And whatever the number comes back, it may come back higher, I don't know, but ask them to, we're getting to a point of actually making a decision and asking them to draw up contracts along, Doug, with the timeline that you presented at the last meeting. So the time to have a $50 a square foot range, maybe they can narrow that down. I don't know what's possible.
We
but
won't
if-
know
if-
until we go out to bid, actually.
Of course not.
We're really going to get.
Of course, but when we go out to bid, there's going to have to be some kind of maximum, because I don't want to be in, well, they come back, the bid is X, and we say, well, that's not what we
Got to
wanted.
be a not to exceed number.
We also have, I'll throw this out there, the potential to bid it, and depending on pricing, we can value engineer at that point. Say, okay, we said don't go above X, and it's X plus Y. We need to reduce Y by eliminating things at that
Yeah.
point. But at that point, we have more information. We have an actual bid. We have the ability to say, okay, we'll have to reduce something. And we can even come up with an options like, this is what the difference would be. This would be the first thing to get cut.
John, is what you're saying is tell them 8,400 square feet and let them tell us the price? They give us their best estimate? Is that what I thought I heard you say that?
I will tell you that that is the price that they would.
Well, I understand. Not that I doubt you, Doug, but
They're experts in the field, and we're not their only client. They're consulting to other people, they're building facilities in other parts of the country, understand costs can be different, and what have you. I think they can come closer to not a hard number, because we won't know that until we actually bid it.
So the
I think,
450,
I don't want to call this a soft number, but I'm not sure that they have, given how long this has been going on and the state of the conversation, I don't know that they've really tried to get this down to brass tacks.
I think the hard number
I'm
we
wrong,
can give
then
is
I'm
the
wrong.
square feet. We can give a hard number for square feet. And then you said 84. That's the same thing Pat said. John, what I'm hearing is at 9250.
I think they can't give us a hard number until they actually have a hard design.
Harder, not hhard.
And we can't get to have a hard design until we tell them how big a
That's right.
facility needs to be.
so can we go with 8,400 square feet and see what they give us? They're the magicians.
so the 450 per square foot is based off a library that they bid out last summer, and they came back at 450 per square foot.
Last summer,
Last summer.
7 months ago.
That's why there's the range. That's the low range.
But that's just,
And then there's also, they can't predict what the market conditions are going to be several
absolutely.
months from now.
So, but that,
And they can't predict what amenities we're going to want to have in that library.
well, that is the deal about the ending price tag. I didn't realize, I thought 5.6 was all in. It's not all in. I understand now. That's going to be a bigger number. I'm not saying I'm accepting it, but I understand it's going to be a bigger number, and that's before we even get to the archives. And that is not the roadmap that was laid out to the residents of this community.
Pat, I'm not, the 5.6 million is quote-unquote all in. That's not just $475 a foot times 8,400 feet. That number includes add-ons above.
Well, I don't believe that the archives renovation, or that building renovation is really a big negotiating point. I think at least I think that it ought to be in the same footprint, you know.
Yes.
It shouldn't be expanded. There's some minor tweaks maybe to the floor plan, but I don't think,
It's essentially the same, but it's a dumbbell shape in a way, and there's some fill-in. But a large part of the cost is it's not handicap accessible. All the bathrooms need to be torn out, all that, and that's where that's coming from. Those costs, it's not because it's being
Yeah, I've-
expanded.
but I've seen design, I saw one of the designs that accommodated the handicap
Yes.
and the facility renovation inside.
Yes.
Without expanding the footprint, and that's where I thought I
That's the
was.
design we landed on.
Right,
So
right. To
this
me, that
is-
would be more than
And it was-
adequate to house those three facilities.
And there were going to be a back, I'm going to call it a back porch, that's not what it is, but we're
They
going
have
to
a
put some
little patio
doors
in the
back
back
there where there
design,
could be a
yeah.
patio. And I'd like to remind everybody, and other people have reminded me this tonight, that we are now talking about 2 large facilities for the Village of Pinehurst. When a year ago, we were talking about 1 facility for the Village of Pinehurst. So that's part of the issue we're going to have with our residents.
But this renovation, I mean, assuming that we build a library somewhere else other than right on top of the Village Green, this is going to happen.
Yes,
So this is like a base point, right?
I agree there.
And then you've got a base point for, as you say, an 8,400 square foot. So what is the delta to get to what they're recommending?
The other thing in common, 8,400 square feet is the same size as the current library. So the archives and the library will be identical sizes.
All
That's not,
has no,
that's
So
apples and oranges.
from different points. you know?
we
On
know
what
what,
basis is that the right proportion, though? I mean,
Well, I don't know if it's the right proportion, but it would be a fact.
That's
That we would have
fair.
2 facilities, 16,800 square feet. That's what we would be now managing, heating, responsible for. That's a big addition to where we were 3 years ago in the
But we
budget for
also
this.
gave you $1 million building and a
What's that?
collection. We gave you a building and a collection.
That's wonderful. We gave you a piece of land. You want to get in? Who's we, Miss Happy? You work for the village.
I think we need to be thinking about the residents. And we know what 9250 square feet looks like. We don't know what a floor plan is for 8,400. So why not at least take a look at it and see what it looks like to us? What's left? What isn't left? What can we live without? Does it make sense? I mean, we're not talking about tangible anything right now. It's just a concept. Let's look at it.
Well, and to Jack's statement, the focus of drawing that plan up is what are the services that you want to provide, or the I won't say services, capabilities. And then as won't be my last comment, but maybe my last comment.
That question's how we got to 9250.
No, I understand. You go back and say, draw me a plan for 8,400. What services, capacities, abilities does that include? They're going to have to take something out. It's not going to be what you saw at 9,200. It can't be.
Yeah,
Well,
my-
the idea of shrinking 400 to 250 is probably not the right
My
answer.
point is, we started much bigger, and we have whittled it down, and basically asking the exact question you're saying there, what else can we take out? And they went against a lot of industry standards, and they compromised and came down to 9250. We got a lot of experts that have weighed in on this in various capacities, and that's what they came with. Ultimately, we're going to have to give them a decision, okay? And so I hear what you're saying, Barb, and yeah, I don't know what 8,400 is going to look like. I don't know what 8,800 is going to look like. I do have a general idea of 9,250. Of course, that's not written in stone either. But at some point in time, the 5 of us are going to have to make a call,
Agreed.
okay?
Right, so I'd like to make a motion to ask the architect firm, Oakley Collier, to create a floor plan for a library facility at 8,400 square feet.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there anybody who wants to say anything more?
It's a working meeting, so I think just if three people are saying that's what you want, then that's what you get. Okay, because that's the guidance that's going to go to the staff. And so, Pat, if you're agreeing to that, then, or John, either one, I don't think so. I think we can move on 9250, and we don't need to beat this around anymore, but if the three of you feel that, then you have the majority.
I was comfortable with 76 to 8,400 a month ago. I'm obviously been dragged to all the way to 8,400. I don't,
All the way to
You made
8,400.
it 88.
Congratulations.
all the way to 8,400. That was, I don't know if I
Yeah,
I don't
88
know.
what you made it to, but that's
I
all
was at
right.
88, but I could, silence over here. I had silence from Dr. Friedman. All right, so,
If the
That's,
majority,
Morgan, not
apparently the
Freeman.
majority would like to move in that
Yes.
direction, and if you want to move in that direction, so I'll respect the, the majorities. I'm a little worried that we keep delaying making a decision here, and sooner or later we have to make a decision. Like I said, I've been watching this for a long time.
no one's watched it longer than you, Jack. But if we adopt the 8,400, we have made one decision right now. And that in Oakley Collier, which is, it has a variety of designs, and how difficult it'll be for them to go back and come up with that. Okay, I'll for the A's and
Is it reasonable, Doug, to say that they would have this back to us possibly 2 weeks from now, but certainly by our first meeting in March?
I think 2 weeks is a quick turnaround, but I'll ask.
You ask.
How much does that cost?
Would that be included in the scope of work of their current contract?
I can ask that. I mean, technically, no, because we asked them for a schematic design, and they provided a schematic design. They're good partners, so maybe there's some ability to
say.
talk.
All right, well, you guys will
It-
work that out with them
And
as a
maybe if
price.
there's a few more dollars to, for extra work,
Okay.
we can talk about it.
All right.
And to be clear, so what I'll go back to them and say, okay, we have this design in 92, 8,400, draw that, and then we're going to analyze what the difference is and what programming needs we've lost between the two.
And we may come back to
Yeah,
9,200.
we may.
Could be. And they need to make sure it's placed, however they design it, so there's room for expansion.
That's understood.
Okay. Okay, having a motion and a second, all those in favor say aye.
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 And those opposed?
Nay.
Okay, motion passes, 8,400 square feet. We'll look forward to the work product they can produce. All right, next item. Believe it or not, there might be a next item. No, yeah, oh, well, this is easy.
There's one more.
One more, determine partners and collaborators. And this was going to be basically, I think this is where we added Jack to something.
I think you already did that, as a matter of fact.
I thought we did this.
Yeah, the only thing I would.
No, there was, oh, no, National Park Service.
National Park Service. It was your recommendation, I think, that we consider assigning one or two of you to be liaisons to the Park Service.
National Park Service, correct.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. So Jack would be the ideal lead on that.
Well, I mean, I'd like some concurrence on that, but I'd be happy to do it since I've been involved. It's more or less.
Is there anyone else who has a particular interest in joining that? I didn't know if Barb, if you do, working with,
I would join, but I'm happy to let Jack take the lead.
okay, well, let's see what the workloads are here. By the way, on the Pinehurst Resort and all, that's Jack and I.
Right, that's correct.
That needs to be corrected.
You and Jack.
Yeah, me and Jack and whatever. Can we, I think it would probably be best if we had Barb on the NPS. You've got a lot of workload there, John. So we'll add that to Jack and Barb, National Park Service. What do we need to do to alert the National Park Service, Jeff? What do we do, send them a note, or do we have to do anything?
I think it would probably be appropriate for Jack and/or Barb to reach out to
Ellen Rankin, or,
Ellen, Rankin, and introduce yourselves and say, hey,
okay.
Yeah, I recall meeting her many years ago. Yep.
All right, Jack?
I've got her contact information. If I can
All right, Jack can do that. That takes care of that. Other business that anyone wants to bring up and Jack? Hey, it's only 9:20. This is unbelievable. This is like the good old days, Dr. Morgan.
Sorry, but yes.
But before someone does that, I also like to ask if anybody can give us any heads up what's on our next meeting's agenda. I'm sort of asking you. You have any idea what's going to come in 2 weeks to us?
Oh, not really.
Batten? Dana? Mid-year budget amendment. Okay, all right.
And many other things.
I'm sure there's many other, I just didn't know what was on the top of your head. Go ahead, John. Where's yours?
So I had sent an email around to all of you and had requested that we have an agenda item to discuss the concept that certainly in the January 23rd meeting, and to a great extent in the regular meeting that we did tonight, the vast majority of what we did was what I would call perfunctory. It may be statutorily required, we may have no choice but to do it, but there was nothing strategic, certainly in the January 23rd meeting. And I think part of the issue, not to be critical of past councils, part of the reason it's taken as long as this is there were a couple of what I would describe as strategic conversations that don't appear to have happened. We're not going to go into those tonight. We've spent enough time on the library. But I cited a number of things, and I'm actually getting out of my mea culpa because I remembered what it was. And there's a gentleman here who was the person, Mr. Geddes, who's the person to whom I pledged it, so I no longer have to do the mea culpa. But the SMPO is working on it's not quite a county-wide transportation plan, but a transportation plan, let's call it for the southern half of the county. When they get around to completing that, which I think is due by the end of '26, right? It will be required that all the towns that are participating in that have a comprehensive plan which has been adopted within the last 5 years. The only person of these 5 people on the council now who were part of the last comprehensive plan was Jack, who was actually on the council, and I think prior to going on the council may have been part of the think tank.
Right, it was like these kind of meetings every week. Yeah, right, exactly.
I think
Right.
Jack wants to discuss that with Richard Tufts, too. Didn't you?
So, and I listed several other things, and the point is, I believe that we should schedule at least one strategic item for discussion, probably in a work session, not in a regular meeting. It's not going to be the same one all the time. We don't need to get the comprehensive plan done tomorrow. We don't necessarily need to go through the same process, although we're certainly going to want to have some form of public input. And I discussed this actually a little bit with Jeff Sanborn. Yes, we could just rubber stamp the last one, or we could make a few tweaks, and so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And we won't have to reinvent the wheel on all these things. Jeff, you push back a little bit that staff is working on some of these. Debt financing, the whole concept of whether to issue debt for any portion of the capital, I'm not going to call it capital needs because we haven't approved these things yet, but the capital wish list, let's
That's a
just
good
call it
example.
that for the moment.
That's a good strategic discussion.
This is a conversation that should take place without changing anything that staff is doing, although I understand staff has a presentation on this, and I would absolutely welcome seeing that. And my point in saying this is, and Doug is left, unfortunately, at the last meeting, Pat said, I'd like to see a range from 7,400 to 7,600, 8,400 square feet. Staff comes back with an entire amount of work which has been done based on 9,250. Now, they didn't dream that up. That was the recommendation from the consultant. I would have thought, in order to avoid not doing work that may ultimately have been said, no, you got to redo it for something else, that you would have come back and said to the mayor, well, we really don't think we can do that. Take the strategy first and then do all the arithmetic so that you don't end up having to do the arithmetic twice. And that's my only point. I listed 5 or 6 things. We don't have to enumerate them all. I didn't think this would be a particularly controversial idea, and I'm not sure what the first one would be. Debt financing may be one of them, or how we put things into the capital wish list before we talk about whether it's debt financed or what have you. So I would just like to say that I think that's part of what, whether you look at the trustees of a college or a foundation, whether you look at the board of directors of a corporation, or whether you look at the elected village council, You start with a strategy, that in combination with the balanced scorecard and all the other inputs we have, drives how you can efficiently allocate staff resources.
Yeah. So I'd just like to make a couple of points. And I'm going to start off by saying we certainly can have those conversations. And I didn't mean to convey the message that we can't or necessarily shouldn't on every one of those topics. But what I was calling attention to, there are several points I was making. One is that we do have a current OFI to develop the framework or methodology that the council will approve and adopt for updating the comprehensive plan. And the staff is working on that now. But I would encourage you to agree on that methodology before you start changing the comp plan.
Oh, no, I'm 100%, but that's what I'm saying. Even before staff is working on that, we ought to have a conversation, because what may come out of that is something different than what you're doing now, and I'm hoping to avoid
Okay.
people starting down this path. Oh, no, go this way.
Let me make
I
a
don't
sug-
want to do that.
Let me make a suggestion. Whatever the methodologies that's being developed, why don't we have that to have a discussion over?
Why don't we what?
Why don't we have that to be the discussion over? Let that be the starting point.
We certainly will, and that's the path we're marching down. We typically formulate recommendations for council to consider and make changes to those recommendations as you see fit, but our job is to tee something up for you. All right?
Well, I can turn that
I'm
around.
gonna go back to another point, okay?
Okay.
You called attention to this meeting, right? And you said you would have thought that staff would have done something different because one council member said he wanted something different. The staff worked for the council.
Right.
We did not have a clear indication that a majority of the council was going to see it different. All we had was Pat's input on that point, okay? So to my earlier point, we go back and we formulate a recommendation and bring it to you, and ultimately you made a different decision, right? Debt financing. The current strategic operating plan and every other strategic operating plan has a debt financing component that is adopted by the council, and we typically, I won't say typically because we haven't had need for debt financing many years, but typically in the past, we have engaged the council about that topic during the strategic retreat. We were a little bit disjointed for a lot of reasons with the strategic retreat this year. But that is when we engage the council about here are the things that we're hearing from you are the priorities, and here's a recommendation about how to do this with fund balance versus debt financing. So we can have that conversation, but I want you to know that there's a current methodology in place that was approved by previous councils. It's not that we're not doing it.
No, Jeff, I'm not accusing anyone of not doing the work at all. What I'm saying is that to have staff coming to council and driving that agenda is different than having council be able to have a conversation separate and apart from staff. Now, we have this, I will call it the balanced scorecard system, because I don't know any other name, but it's more encompassing than just the balanced scorecard itself, which I'm still trying to get my arms around, and 6 months from now, I'll know more than I do today. And I'm not proposing that we change that, but as I observed, I didn't, in the so-called strategic retreat in December, I didn't think we did a lot of talking about things that I would define as strategic. I think that was driven by the balanced scorecard process, and because of how comprehensive that system is. And I think it's an excellent system. I am not arguing against changing it or certainly not getting rid of it. That system is not it becomes more tactical. It is not inherently strategic on itself.
We build operational plans.
Right. It is inherently tactical. It is not inherently strategic. And all I'm saying is that there has to be sometimes a starting point which may produce an input into that system, or it may not because you're already working on it. That was my entire point. And I think as a council that needs to be focused And so there needs to spend at least some of our time thinking about these issues. The only way we'll discipline ourselves to do that and not become subsumed by the perfunctory that we must do is if we schedule something on a work schedule. And by the way, if we have a huge, this would have been a perfect example. I would not have scheduled a separate discussion for this because the library discussion itself was going to be fairly in-depth. And if we have a packed schedule, we may defer. We're not going to have one this month. I don't want to sit here till 10:30 or 11 o'clock every night, and I don't think anybody else does either. That's my only point.
This discussion was on the agenda because council agreed to it.
I agree.
Absolutely right. What other item? Just run out your item list, just so that we have an idea of what you're thinking about, and so that we can hear, we can nod heads or get comments, and or the village manager can say, hey, that's already coming up in April, or that's scheduled for whatever.
Okay, the items that I listed in my email were the 2019 comprehensive plan, which will need to be updated, not tomorrow morning. Examination of the full list of performance metrics. Existing capital projects, 29 million versus 13 million of surplus. That's a strategic conversation that we could have that has nothing to do it will pull together threads of debt financing, yes or no. I mean, we've had an operating surplus virtually every year as far back as anyone can remember. So the 13 million that we have is not everything that we have to spend. We'll generate a surplus this year and presumably next year and the good Lord willing, every year. So we'll have more.
We always assume we're going to.
Right. Debt financing, process by which new capital projects are added. Those were the 5 things that I had on there, and I'm certainly open to ideas from other members of council.
Can I ask for clarification on one of those points?
Sure.
The areas from the resident survey that you want to have a conversation about what ones we need to improve on. Is the intent to do that to impact this SOP or the next one?
I'd like to be glib and say neither. I'd like to be glib and say neither, but I guess the answer is not, when you say this SOP, the one we are currently operating under that was adopted.
Developing right now.
So the one we're developing that will be in place for fiscal year '25. Yeah, I think that we ought to have a conversation about whether, because I don't have a conclusion, whether there should be changes made, whether there should be an OFI to look at that in more. I'm not exactly sure because I don't have my arms fully around that process yet.
Don't we have a discussion coming up on that?
No, that's the whole point of the strategic planning process we do in the fall.
No, but I mean, as vis-a-vis up to the adoption of the budget, aren't we going to review how that would look for 5 years?
Right, but
That's what I'm thinking.
I think what John is suggesting is we go back and look at all the survey data again and figure out which things you want to address. That was the whole point of what we did in December, and the things that we briefed the council on leading up to December.
Well, obviously I wasn't on council leading up to December. I can only start in December. Let me take one example. There's a critique, if you will, or one of the lower rated elements in that is council. I think we should talk about what we need to do as a council. I'm not scalp hunting here. I'm not looking to say, well, that got worse and whose fault is that? That's not my point. And we can start with council. What is it that we can be doing better, differently? Why are there 9 people who come here to almost every meeting and not 15 or 20 or 90? I don't know how many are watching. My guess is at 9:35 tonight, they're virtually 0, but I could be wrong about that. Right?
Hooked onto this now.
Right? So I'll start with that one. What can I do better as a new councilman to try to improve the perception of council? Because I think if we can do that, we are going to net be better for the village. Jeff and I talked with a number of business leaders in the campaign. We know we have some things we can do better. I think we made a good start with respect to this, do we or do we not close the streets? And I've heard from several of the people that I went back to, not to second guess the survey that Doug did, but just because these are friends and I'm in their shops routinely anyway, And every single one of them said, that was a great thing that the council did. And Jeff made some, and they mentioned Jeff was there and Barb was there. They didn't mention Jack, they didn't mention, but they may have been. So there are things that we can be doing as a council. And I'd love to have that as a discussion topic at some point. Now, we're not going to do 93 items or what have you, and we're not going to go 1 through 93. Maybe we'll pick the 10 that got the worst, or the 10 where we actually think we can do something that would be tangible to change it. That's the kind of conversation that I'm talking, and that might create an OFI for fiscal year next year.
What you're describing, that's the reason we do the performance gap analysis.
Right, but I don't remember seeing that ranked 1 through 93, and Matt took me through the two, which I will call objective measures that are used for that, and 2 subjective measures. So I'm understanding that better, but that's because I went and asked him to sit down and take me through it for what I thought would be 20 minutes and turned out to be 90. But I'm coming up the learning curve, and I got a long way to go.
Yeah. What do you think we could add to 2 weeks from now's work session among the various items that John just mentioned? What one item do you think we could kick off to have a discussion on? Is there any of those?
I think that a philosophical discussion about the appropriate use of debt. I don't think there's any harm in that.
Good. Happy with, Dana and I had an ad hoc conversation. I was actually into CIT, and she happened to see me on the way out. And I know you have some material on that, and that'd be fine as a starting point.
All right, so we've got something we can add to next week and, or 2 weeks from now, and have a discussion.
Now, another one that might be helpful right now is one that you brought up, Pat, which is if the council desires to change the fund balance policy, that's something that, depending on how long it takes, might change how we look at the 5-year forecast for building in the SOP.
And
Although
that
it may
is
not
the-
change it in the way you think it's going to.
that's part of the reason to have the discussion. But I would put that behind debt financing, because I think that's better closer to the budget thing, rather than,
Hypothetically, we may make a decision with regard to debt and the library. I'm not saying we will, but we might. It's been discussed in the
Bob,
past,
you
and I
made
got,
some suggestion too.
I'll hold on to those.
Okay, that's fine.
Well, one of the things I'm hearing also is that you're talking about the strategic conversations, and I fully appreciate that, and I agree that the strategy and the guidance comes from the staff, or from the council to the staff. But there also needs to be a structure on how we strategically plan and the guidance we give, and that is currently been in place for a while, and it sounds like you're not really comfortable with it, with exactly how that's working. So I think we might want to have a conversation of what strategic parameters or process are we going to be using to give guidance, because right now we're talking about OFIs, we're talking about the strategic planning meeting, we have a pre-retreat, we have the retreat, that kind of stuff, and then everything we're doing. So we need to ensure the staff has a framework in which they can effectively deliver what we're asking for. And what you're asking for now is more conversations, okay? But it needs to fit in with what we have now, or we need to change that. So at some point in time, we have to have a conversation, because there is a structure
right.
for all of this.
Yes, I would say that I have a question, which I'm holding off on because I don't understand fully the current process well enough to say that I want to change it.
Well, that's kind of what I read into, when you called Jeff's pushback on there, that's kind of what I read into it, was that, hey, we do have a structure here. And if you're not comfortable with the structure, then, hey, let's have a conversation on it. But if you are comfortable with it, or if you learn more about it, and you're comfortable with that, then let's make sure we schedule the conversations to fit within that structure.
I think we should. To my way of thinking, to my way of thinking, much of that structure.
The topic being discussed. Happens to me.
To my way of thinking, much of that structure is more tactical And it drives staff in a very efficient way to say, here's the work list that we need to get accomplished, and here are the benchmarks that we're using to decide, are we making progress, are we not?
I understand exactly. And then that the current structure we have, the intent is to do exactly what you're saying.
Right.
But I'm also hearing that you're not necessarily comfortable with that. Either that could be because you don't fully understand it, or we didn't have the right conversations this past retreat, that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And so what I'm saying, instead of just throwing everything out and let's just have these conversations, let's make sure it fits within a framework. Okay?
Well, why don't we test drive it in 2 weeks?
And for example, on the whole debt situation, I think if you go back and review the materials from the strategic retreat, Dana called attention to where we were using debt and where we weren't. And that was an opportunity to engage about the appropriateness in each one of those cases.
But I understand this is a technical GASB definition. We are not using debt at all at the moment. We are debt-free.
Right.
We have some things on some of these
We have
leases,
things in the
which we,
plan, in the 5-year plan, in the plan, where the plan is to use debt.
But we need to discuss.
That's the existing plan. And it's what we presented to the council in December.
but I don't remember an amount.
But what I think
don't
John,
remember a
what I think
structure.
John was saying relative to debt is that maybe council could have a conversation as to which type of projects may be appropriate for
That's
debt.
the philosophical discussion.
Strategic discussion, right?
Yes.
Is that what you're
And-
saying?
And
Yes,
as
I
I
mean,
mentioned before, we have an off-the-shelf product that addresses that question.
I mean, a library is a 20, 30, 40-year asset. It's perfectly appropriate to finance that with debt, with a
What
15, 20.
projects are the most appropriate for debt
Yeah.
are projects that meet 2 criteria.
And for example,
Dana can correct me if I'm wrong, but they need to serve the general population relatively uniformly. Oh crap, what's the other one?
No, I was just going to add, I think, from my perspective, knowing that there is a larger debt issuance in the 5-year plan than what the village has done in the past. And it's, right now, it's $3 million for half of the estimated public services relocation cost.
Right.
I think it would be helpful to have that discussion because the village also does not have a formal, council-approved debt policy. And those are things that could be addressed in that debt policy.
Yeah. Anyway, the second one I was thinking about was it needs to serve future generations as much as it does current
Yes.
residents.
But I think that's a good example, it's an example of where we could have that discussion and reaffirm or change or discuss or the policy itself. That's a strategic discussion, right?
yes,
Okay, that's just one example is what I meant.
Yeah.
yeah.
I thought we had
I
something
mean,
on debt.
there's a lot of focus on tax rates, right? A lot of people are concerned about tax rates. You know the problem with debt. It drives operating cost. Operating cost drives tax rates.
Right.
I'm more than modestly familiar with the concept of debt issuance, yes.
Professor Friedman, that's right. Okay. All right, so,
I have
no?
I have nothing further.
yeah, you sure? All right, so we'll,
Well, let me
Look,
check my notes here.
no, don't please. 2 weeks, you'll put something on the agenda that's appropriate? I have, last thing, thank you to Dana for 2 work products that I've made a lot of use of. The financial, the June 30th final numbers, and the item you sent to all of us on the top vendors.
Vendor list, yeah.
The vendor list was informative. Someday I'll get back to you about a question or two, but I appreciated that. Thank you for asking for it, Jack. Anybody have anything else?
Yeah, I move to adjourn the work session.
Here we go.
Second.
Second, we're done.
Topic, I adjourn.
We're out of here. Oh, it's like the